There's people who believe that these things have some sort of ability to connect with people, the mind speak, the telepathic communication. And then there's just people who believe for whatever reason, maybe it's a little bit more of the high strangeness aspect of it, that for some reason they show themselves to other people and don't show themselves to some people. You have to be ready to see them or they have to want to be seen by you. That's a difficult row for me to hoe because in order for me to go down that path, I would have to believe that there's something more to them than flesh and blood. There has to be some sort of a high strangeness aspect to them. And I don't really believe that because here's what happens. One of the most common things, situations where people see these things, they're crossing the road, roadside crossings, right? Somebody's going down the road 60 miles an hour and they see this flash go across the road. Is that them showing themselves to you because you just happen to be driving by in your Prius? I don't think so. I think they're, if that's what it happens and it is a Sasquatch, I think they're just getting from one place to another, right? It's like, it's no different than my neighbor seeing me drive from here to Walmart to pick up some groceries. I think these things are just moving and doing what they do, and people happen to see them. And then some people want to project more to it onto the situation and say, oh, he showed himself to me because he wanted me to see him. I don't necessarily buy that. I think you're just in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time, according to some people when they have their experiences. And I don't think there's really anything more to it than that, honestly.
Hi guys, I'm here with a man called Brian Keane Sharp. He is known for Sasquatch Odyssey, Untold Radio Network, and Bigfoot and Beyond. And I came across Brian in a podcast, and I was actually listening to one of his podcasts only yesterday. One of his very first podcasts that he did, with a guy called Flint. And the question was, is Bigfoot Nephilim? What do you think about that, Brian? Well, first of all, how are you? And thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate the invite. Yeah, I remember that episode with Flint. That something that's come up over and over and over looking into this subject is people obviously have tons of different opinions on what these things could be. I'm still trying to figure out if they're real or not. I'm one of those people that is still skeptical. I've had experiences of my own, but I haven't seen one of these things. So it's difficult to say one way or the other for me if they're 100% real. And if they are, obviously, everybody has speculation on what they are. I personally don't buy into the Nephilim theory. I don't think that there's some sort of fallen angel. I think there's some sort of, if they are out there and people are certainly experiencing something, we know the phenomenon's real. But if they are out there, I think they're more of some sort of a leftover relic hominoid of some sort, maybe some sort of an offshoot of Gigantopithecus. Some people have talked about Paranthropus, and there's tons of different suspects for what these things might be, depending on who you have a conversation with. I'm more along the lines of possibly a Gigantopithecus leftover or some sort of a relative to them, because I think it's a lot less of a stretch than some of the other characters out there that people have said, oh, this could possibly be a Sasquatch. But ultimately, the great thing about Sasquatch is nobody really knows anything, right? It's all subjective. We all have our opinions. But for me, short answer to your question, I don't think Nephilim is where it's at. People make a good argument for it in a lot of cases, but it's a stretch for me. It's sort of, in my opinion, trying to explain a mystery with another mystery wrapped in an enigma, and you're throwing in some supernatural stuff, and it just doesn't compute to me. I'm more of an Occam's razor kind of guy. The simplest explanation probably is the explanation. So to me, it would make more sense that there's some sort of a relic hominoid that's left over that's went undetected some way, shape, form, or fashion versus fallen angels and something that's more out there as far as paranormal kind of stuff.
More metaphysical. I had Ron Moorhead on the show, and he goes with that metaphysical aspect of it. He by well not by he believes in it, and I can see why to a extent. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was actually supposed to have Ron on a roundtable yesterday. We ended up having to cancel it for a myriad of reasons, but I've talked to Ron about that several times, and I get where he's coming from. He's a very open-minded guy. And look, Ron's been doing this for a lot of decades, right? I mean, he's probably been doing this 50 years at this point, maybe longer. And we are really no closer to proving that these things are real for people like me and other people that are in the similar situation that I'm in, who are into the subject, who have had experiences they can't explain. but we're really no closer to finding out what these things are and definitively if they in fact exist as a flesh and blood animal. And that's one of the things. I just finished Ron's new book, Bigfoot Unveiled. I read it in one day, and he talks a lot about that. He goes into his quantum physics theories, and I see that on a micro level. I'm not sure on a macro level. I'm buying what he's putting down as far as the theories behind how these things could happen that way. But look, I've said it plenty of times. We have been doing the same things as far as Bigfoot research for decades and decades and decades, and we haven't produced a body. They are not recognized by science. So is it time to start turning over some new stones and looking in different places? I'm certainly open to that. I talk a little bit about that in my own book, Sasquatch Unleashed: The Truth Behind the Legend, came out in March. And that's one of the things towards the end of the book I talk about is, do we have these lanes that we can stay in, the flesh and blood lane or the woo or the high strangeness lane? I think there's something to be gleaned from both of those. My personal opinion is we need to separate those more, because what we really need is more science. There are a few scientists that are involved in Bigfoot. Dr. Jeff Meldrum's a friend of mine. He comes to mind. Very physical, flesh and blood, anthropological look at these things. He studies the morphology of the footprints and the casts, and he believes that these creatures are real based on nothing more than footprints and casts that he has taken a look at. Then you got people now like my home state here in North Carolina. We've got Darby Orcutt over at the University of North Carolina, NC State, who is actually doing a DNA study right now. He's testing what he believes to be purported Sasquatch DNA samples that people are sending in. So, and that's funded by the state. It's NC State is doing the funding for this. So that's a huge step for Bigfoot, because somebody's really taking a scientific look at that. But there's only a handful of people in science that are looking at it. So when you start talking about Nephilim and alien theories and quantum physics and them coming in and out of portals and being multidimensional, you lose the scientist there. And I think on some level, I certainly am open minded to that because people have those experiences. And I think there's something to that. But I'm more of a flesh and blood kind of guy where you have to concentrate on the flesh and blood aspect that science can then get behind, if that makes sense, and look more deeply into the subject. Because I think until that happens, frankly, it's going to be the same thing that we've been doing over and over and over again. And we all expect a different result that hasn't come yet. Science has got to get involved on some level, whether it be DNA testing or looking at these things and doing research into them. This is something I do another podcast called That Bigfoot Podcast. I host several podcasts. For those that listen to me in Sasquatch Odyssey, know I do 4 full-time podcasts. So Wayne and I, my co-host on That Bigfoot Podcast, just recorded an episode of that before I hopped on with you. And we talked a little bit about that because there's no real collaboration even amongst the researchers. I'm a flesh and blood guy. Ron is not, right? Ron and I can sit down and have a cup of coffee and have a conversation, or I can have him on for a roundtable on the show, which I've done a couple of times, and we can agree to disagree. I believe what Ron says he believes. He believes what I believe, but somewhere in the middle lies the truth, and we can have those conversations. But when you have those different facets of the research, flesh and blood creatures versus the paranormal, the woo, the high strangeness, as long as that's going on, we can't collectively agree in Bigfoot as Bigfoot researchers if they're flesh and blood. Are they Nephilim? Are they aliens? We can't even agree on that. So we can't come together and collaborate and really look into the subject deeply on any level, because we're still arguing about what they are. So there's so much of that going on, and I think we just have to, ultimately, people have to pick a lane and be open-minded to both sides, but really hone in on saying, I believe these are flesh and blood creatures. If you believe they exist, they're probably some sort of a leftover relic hominoid of some sort. Let's go down that path and see where it leads us. And then some of the weird stuff may come into play, and we open-minded to that, but we focus on physical evidence, anecdotal accounts, and we hone in into a specific area where people have had a lot of experiences maybe, and we try to do that and collaborate. That's one of the things Wayne and I were just talking about. It's very difficult to get people to do. There are hot spots over here like Area X out in Oklahoma, very famous spot with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. They go in there and they spend months at a time, and I've talked to tons of people that have been there. I've probably had 6 or 8 witnesses that have been in there long term and had tons of experiences and seen these things. Why aren't we all going into that area? Why aren't all the researchers in America converging on this one area and focusing on trying to get some evidence. Maybe it's a body, maybe it's collecting a specimen, maybe it's getting video, maybe it's getting photographs of individuals in multiple different time frames in different places in that area by different people. That's where you start getting real evidence, but we're not doing that. And that's
Mhm.
one of the things Wayne and I just talked about. I think it's a lot of ego comes into play. People are very secretive about their areas. They're very secretive about their research. They want to be the ones to discover it. I want to be the guy who finds Bigfoot. I don't care who it is. I just want somebody to find it. And until we all come together as a collaborative, I think we're just going to keep beating our heads into the proverbial wall, and we're going to keep documenting a lot of anecdotal experiences people have. And occasionally there'll be footprints cast and maybe some hair and some possible DNA. But ultimately, it's going to take a collective effort amongst all the researchers, in my opinion, to really push the ball down the field. That was a really long answer to a short question, I think.
No, that was a great answer, a fantastic answer. Let me ask you this, Brian. So what was the name of that place in North Carolina that the government are, the scientists are studying it? What was that? Didn't know they were.
Yeah,
You
it's
said that.
it's the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. It's a group of individuals that come together as a collective from all walks of life. They're different types of Bigfoot researchers. You know, some of them have jobs. Sometimes people do it full time. It's just a collective of people that joined in as the group, and that's what they call their group. So it's not really anything to do with the government, but
Oh, right. Okay.
the area has been come to be known infamously or famously as Area X
Hmm.
because when they started going into this particular area, it's kind of on the border of Oklahoma and Texas. They started Area A and Area
Hmm.
B and Area C, and so on and so forth, because that's how they named these research areas to keep up with them. And Area X became the most well known, at least for most Bigfoot researchers, because of the level of interactions that people were claiming to have with Sasquatch in that area. So
Hmm.
Area X has really stuck out. There's a valley next door to Area X where people like Brian Brown, who used to be associated with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, and they've kind of went off and done his own thing. There's a valley right next door to Area X, and it has just as much activity that's claimed by Brian and some of the other researchers that go in there that I've interviewed on my show. So clearly, if these people aren't completely delusional, if they're not delusional and they're not making up their stories and they're having these experiences, there are clearly a plan of at least several individuals that people are interacting with. They're hearing vocalizations, they're recording vocalizations. These things are throwing rocks at them. They're seeing them physically, seeing them with their own eyes. They've seen juveniles. They've seen what look to be toddlers or babies, small versions of these creatures. They're in the trees, swinging through the trees like they're in a jungle somewhere in West Africa. So there's clearly something going on there. But
Hmm.
Area X is that place that people, it's just become synonymous with Bigfoot. I mean, Rob Lowe, he and his sons went out there when they were doing the Lowe files several years ago. They filmed an episode in Area X with the guys from the North American Wood Ape Conservancy because Rob Lowe, very famous actor here in America and really around the world, has always been fascinated with Bigfoot. And they had experiences while he was there. I've actually had Brian Brown on the show who was with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy and with the Lowe's. He was sort of their liaison on that trip, and he talked about some of the things that they experienced. They left there convinced that Bigfoot was in that area. So, it's a very active area. But again, to my earlier point, I think we should be concentrating there, but you have to be invited there. They don't just let anybody come in. And I get that on some level because I have 40 acres of property here that I research on that's mine. It's where I live. It's where we live. It's where our house is. So I'm very protective of that because it's where I live. But I do occasionally invite researchers on because we've had activity here. We've heard vocalizations. I've cast footprints here. So we do
How
invite.
often? How often?
Well, we've been here, we've owned the property since the end of 2017. And over the course of however many years that is, 6 years, whatever, we've heard vocalizations a myriad of times. Earlier on, we started hearing like distant vocalizations, and we've heard what sounds like the Ohio howl for anybody who's into Bigfoot. Matt Moneymaker's famous Ohio howl that you hear, the really loud, long kind of siren call. We heard that 50 yards from our house a couple of years ago. And the footprints. I mean, the last set of footprints I cast last summer, which are about 14 and a half inches long, and at their widest, they're about 7.5 to 8 inches wide at the heel. And you can see pictures of these in the book, Sasquatch Unleashed, The Truth Behind the Legend. I've included that there. It's the only place I've released these photographs because the foot cast turned out too good. They're really, really the best that I've cast. And I've cast probably 5 or 6 different sets over the last couple of years in and around our property here. And they were 50, 60 yards from our house, just up near a chicken coop in the woods. So very close by. I've had weird things happen with gifting stumps. Things have been left on weird places. There's a bunch of weird tree breaks. We found weird tree structures. So it's a lot of anecdotal stuff. I've never seen a Bigfoot here. I've heard those things. I've cast the footprints. I've seen what others consider to be evidence with the tree breaks and the tree structures, but I can't definitively say it's Bigfoot. I never have and never will. But
Mhm.
I said all that to say it is where I live. So I'm very protective of my home. And, a lot of people listen to my show, and I've made some enemies out there. So I don't invite just everybody to, hey, here's my address, come and research on my property. But when you do have areas like Area X and you do have places that people could go and collaborate, I think, just in my opinion, again, my opinion is what it is. Everybody has one, but I believe that we should be doing more collaboratively to look for these creatures in areas like that, because what happens is everybody goes out in the woods. Just because there's woods doesn't mean there's necessarily a Sasquatch there, right? Just like a black bear or a certain kind of a bird or mountain lions or whatever the case may be. Yes, they exist. Yes, they're in wooded areas, but they may not be where you are. But if you know and you've narrowed down through years of research that there is a lot of sightings, there's a lot of anecdotal accounts, and a lot of researchers have had experiences and maybe even gathered evidence. Maybe there's some photographs, maybe there's some recordings of sounds, vocalizations, those kind of things. Maybe it's foot castings from footprints, trackways. If you know that's happening and we all concentrate instead of everybody being spread out doing their own thing, I think you're going to get a better result, right? If you got more eyes and boots on the ground looking in a certain area where these things probably are, you got a better chance of finding one. Otherwise, it's like finding a needle in a stack of needles. There are hundreds of millions of acres of open land here in North America where people go out and look for Bigfoot. Really, what are the chances of finding? There could be one standing in the middle of my 40 acres and I could go look for it for 4 weeks straight. I may never find it because I never go to that one spot where it's at, right? So I don't know. I just want people to be more collaborative. I would love for that to happen. It's just been on my mind so much recently that I think if we come together and start talking, that's what happened in the UFO field. I think a lot of individuals were doing a lot of stuff related to UAPs and UFOs over the years. And I think eventually this core of researchers started, you see it more in the documentaries. There's researchers that have done their own documentaries, and then you watch a UFO documentary. There's like 6 or 8 of these brilliant minds that have been looking into this. They finally came together and sort of collaborated. And what happened? We started getting a little bit of disclosure, right? And I'm not saying it's necessarily related. All those things could be completely oblivious to the other and may not have anything to do with the other. But I feel that personally, that once those people started coming together collaboratively, things started happening and we got a little bit from the government and people started coming forward. And the more you collaborate and the more you work together and you got more minds on a problem, I think the better off you're going to be ultimately.
Brian, how many people have you interviewed how many stories have you collected?
Wow. At this point, there are, I think, 460 episodes of Sasquatch Odyssey at this point.
Wow.
So
I was
there's,
listening. Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
on.
Yeah, I mean, if just one episode, there's typically one interview per episode, but you got to figure there's probably another, I would say 50 to 80 people that I've probably talked to individually at conferences, maybe even upwards of 100 plus of people that have shared their story with me that never make it on the air to Sasquatch Odyssey. So I would say at least 500 people at this point as a conservative estimate of people that have claimed to have had some sort of experience with Bigfoot.
What is the one story that really puzzles you? Not the one that most interests you, but the one that most puzzles you, the one that leaves you most unsettled.
There's a couple of those that come to mind over the years. There's one I talked about so many times recently about a hunter who felt like he was being drawn in by a Sasquatch doing wood knocks. Again, it's completely subjective. He has no way of proving his feeling, But I think that really stuck out to me because afterwards he told me he felt like this thing was drawing him in to do something nefarious. He felt
Mm.
like it was drawing him into that area for a reason. And he felt like that reason wasn't a good reason. He ended up getting out unscathed. He said he came face to face with this thing. He backed up, he got away, and made it out of the area. But that stuck out to me because he had this overwhelming feeling that this thing meant to do him harm. And maybe he saw this thing, saw that he had a pretty powerful weapon. He didn't shoot the thing or anything, but he did have a weapon, and he thinks they know what they are and what it could do. So he feels like he made it out unscathed. But there's been so many over the years. There's a one in particular early on the show that stuck out because there was a couple of times where these things were they were having issues with dogs being injured and even killed by Sasquatch. And that's a reoccurring theme that people have said these things don't like dogs. They have bad interactions with them. That stuck out to me. And just some of the weirder stories, honestly. The I've interviewed people who have claimed to see these things coming off of alien craft, landed alien craft, and they've claimed to see Bigfoot walking down and coming off of these craft. So that sort of feeds into this possible alien Bigfoot connection that I don't really buy into so much. Again, I'm not saying that that's not possible. It's just not where I focus because those are the exception to the rule when it comes to most mundane as seeing a 8 to 9 foot tall hairy bipedal ape in North America that's not supposed to exist can be. But they're pretty mundane, right? It's a hunter out. They see this thing walking past. It's a glimpsing thing. They see it running across a field or whatever. But you do have those occasions where people have those outlandish sort of high strangeness things where orbs are involved, alien craft, strange lights, and other things. So it really runs the gamut for me. But some of those really stuck out to me when people have strange experience. Some of the habituation stuff really sticks out to me. It's one of those things that interests me, but it's also been very frustrating for me because you talk to people who say they deal with these things in a habituation situation, meaning it's an ongoing interaction, sometimes for decades, right? There's a very famous one from Tennessee, 50 years with Bigfoot from the Mary Green book with Janice Carter. I've never talked to Janice. I've had people who have interviewed her on the show, and I've played some of her interview and talked about that at length. But that story stuck out because 50 years her family was supposed to be living alongside a group of Sasquatch, not just one, not just two, but a family, a clan of these things over a period of 5 decades. And if you've ever seen the evidence that's been produced from that, some of the photographs of footprints and those things, it is definitely not what you would expect, at least from me as an investigator, to say, if you spent 50 years with these things, you should have some pretty good video. You should have some pretty good photographs. You should have some physical evidence that they've left behind, whether it be hair or something else that could possibly be tested. But it seems to me that, and I've interviewed several people in habituation situations. I'd probably say at this point, maybe three or four. And I've actually talked to a gentleman just a couple of days ago that we're going to get scheduled for the show that has claimed to be in a habituation situation for the last 3 years. And almost without fail, when I say to these people off the air, during conversations initially, hey, if you've been dealing with these things for 5 years, you move from one state to another and they followed you to your new home, you've got to have some pretty good evidence. You've got photographs, right? You got video of these things because they're in your yard. Oh, yeah, I've got tons of photographs. Well, send me 25 photographs and it sticks, trees, and leaves. We call them blob squatches, right? There's literally nothing there. So it's very frustrating to me because I think those stories are very interesting for a myriad of reasons. Just the claim of having this hairy, big bipedal ape that's not supposed to exist in and around your property and your home, and sometimes in some cases interacting with you and your family on a regular basis. Yet there's never any proof for it. At least it's not definitive proof for me. So those are some frustrating things that I deal with as an investigator because again, it's difficult to listen to those stories and expect that somebody has this ongoing interaction with these creatures, yet there's really no physical evidence to prove it. But these people can be very convincing, and most of them are. I believe, I've said this so many times on the show, I've never had anybody on the show that I don't believe believes that they have the experience that they share, right? Sometimes it happens only in their mind. Sometimes it happens in real life. Maybe it's not exactly like they say. And then
So,
sometimes it's exactly like they say.
so you've never had anybody on the show who they knew that they were bluffing, like somebody that came on the show and they knew that they were just trying to pull a fast one on you.
I don't think I've ever interviewed anybody that I think there might have been one person that I scrapped the interview a couple of years ago, but I think that was more of a mental health issue. Once I got 20 minutes into having a conversation with this gentleman, it was fairly clear to me without being a psychologist or a psychiatrist that he might have had some mental health issues on board. So I kind of scrapped that because I just, in good faith, I couldn't put it out there because I felt like he was more delusional.
Mhm.
However, as far as other people on the show, I don't think I've ever had anybody that I've aired their episode that I knew for a fact. Well, I know I've never aired one that I knew for a fact was lying to me or making up their story. Has that happened? I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has. You can't have an encounters show like mine. There's other encounter shows out there that deal with Dogman and even other Bigfoot encounters podcasts that have 1,000 episodes out there. So that is going to happen, but I've never knowingly aired somebody's episode that I knew was just BSing me, hands down.
Sure. I would imagine you've got a good eye or ear for that because you are from a law background. You were a police officer, I believe, for 16 years, was it? Or
Yes.
did you ever experience anything as a police officer? Did you ever, for example, go to a scene that might have been directly or indirectly related to a Sasquatch?
No, because I policed in the city of Atlanta. It's a very urban area. It is urban sprawl. It's a big city. And there was never any even, I mean, there's some areas and neighborhoods on the outskirts of town that I policed, but never anything that would be conducive to having a creature like that. If it's a flesh and blood creature, now, if they're coming in and out of portals or other dimensions, I guess they could be anywhere. But no, I never really experienced anything that I would be considered related to Bigfoot, certainly, and nothing really paranormal at all, ghosts or anything like that. You do have those calls that you look back on as an investigator who is into the paranormal and into ghosts and into UFOs and obviously Bigfoot. I look back on some of those calls that I answered in the past where strange things were happening with people's alarms and they thought there were prowlers going on, or even hearing things in their house where they thought people was breaking in or something like that. I look back now and think, yeah, could it be that they were having some sort of a poltergeist activity or something weird? Sure, but nothing that I ever experienced, or nobody ever called me and said, I think Bigfoot's hanging out in the backyard or anything like that.
In the whole history of Bigfoot phenomenon, has there ever been a case that has been in the city? Or has it always been in the woods? Has there ever been a case where there's been a Bigfoot sighting actually in a city?
Yeah, I think it's more so than you would imagine. Now, when you say city, I wouldn't say Bigfoot walking down a main street in town, no, but on the outskirts, certainly. That's one of the things that has really fascinated me about this subject the more I got into it, because when I first got into the subject and really started digging into it, I, like most people, I think when you think about Bigfoot, you think you have to be deep in the woods to have an experience. And once you start really looking into the subject and really talking to people who've had experiences or claim to have had experiences with Bigfoot, it is more on the edges. It's on the periphery of where civilization meets wooded areas. Greenways, for example, here in the States, there's a greenway just probably 6 miles from me on the road that I live on. I can drive 10 minutes and be at Walmart or any restaurant that I want to eat at in my downtown area. But when you drive out here to my property, if you could see it now, it is nothing but thick wooded area. It's 40 acres, and there's nothing but hundreds of acres of just property around us. And our nearest neighbor, full time neighbor, is about 3/4 of a mile away, maybe to a mile away. So we're very remote, but 10 minutes from town is not that remote, right? I've been on expeditions to places like Radium, BC, Canada. I was up there last October on expedition for about 7 days. We were 18 miles deep in the woods in that particular area. No cell service for 30 miles. I mean, we lost cell service 30 miles before we turned off onto the road that took us another 18 miles deep into the woods. The only connection we had was a generator that brought up Starlink, and we turned that on one time, middle of the week, just to let everybody know we were still alive, and then that was it. So, and we had experiences there. that I believe are possibly related to Bigfoot. I didn't see one, heard some things, got some rocks thrown at us a couple of times, heard wood knocks, heard whoops, heard what sounds like samurai chatter from Ron Moorhead's Sierra Sounds, as a matter of fact. It sounded very similar to some of the stuff that Ron has produced on his CDs, but we're 18 miles deep in the woods. But I just interviewed a guy a couple of weeks back
Scott
from three.
Nielsen, was it? No, Scott Nelson. I was listening to that interview where Scott Nelson was talking about the language of the. Is that the guy you were going to say? Sorry.
Well, no, I did interview Scott late last year because we hung out
Oh,
together at a conference here in North Carolina, but that wasn't where I was going.
oh, sorry.
I was going, there's a guy that I interviewed here in North Carolina that back in the 70s, he had a couple of sightings and close encounters with Bigfoot that he claims happened in a cul-de-sac in an area where surrounded by homes that back up to the woods. So again, he's on that edge of there's homes in this area that are just like any other neighborhood that you would see across America, but it backs up into wooded areas. And these things are coming in because I think what happens is it's very much like other wild animals. You see a lot of deer in neighborhoods, right? People smack deer on the road all the time, going in and out of their homes and in city type areas. I think it's the same thing for Bigfoot. If these things are out there, I think they're coming in just like other animals because when we go farther closer to the woods, and I say we as in people, we go farther and encroach in those areas and we build those edges. I think animals come in because it's easy for them. There's agriculture there. We plant flowers, we plant gardens, we plant corn. Deer come in and eat those, rabbit come in and eat those. Then predators follow the rabbits and the deer. So you have predators. And if Sasquatch is what I think it is, it's an apex predator. It eats deer. It may eat rabbits. It may eat the corn. So you're creating these edges, and I think it brings them in closer. So you don't have to be 10 miles deep into the woods to have an experience with these things. Most of the experiences or anecdotal accounts that I have documented on my show and talk to people just in general, they're in a national park, maybe a half a mile away from their car, from a parking area where there's 45 other cars parked and there's people all around and they're having these experiences. So it's more of an edge. So yeah, I don't think there's any Bigfoot stuff going on in the middle of the metropolis like the city of Atlanta, but 30 miles away from Atlanta in some of these rural areas outside on what would be considered the suburbs, absolutely, there are people having experiences. So I think it happens a lot more on the edge, closer to what you would consider city, town, civilization than people would expect. Because you say Bigfoot, you think, oh, you got to be 20 miles in the woods to have an encounter. I don't think that's necessarily accurate.
Out of all the video evidence, the famous video, like do you think the Patterson video is real? What big video evidence do you think is fake, and what do you think is real? Which ones do you think are real, fake?
My opinion has changed so many times on the PG film. I've done entire episodes breaking down the PG film. And what I did the last time I did a breakdown was really look at Bob Gimlin is still alive. Obviously, Roger Patterson passed away in the 70s. So all we really have is Bob and Bob's story and then the footage. That's really all we have. And Bob's story has never changed. From 1967 until now, his story has pretty much stayed the same. I do have this approach, like I try to approach it like a criminal investigation. So I looked at what he said because that's really the most important thing. Yeah, the video is very important, but it is what it is. It's grainy. There's been tons of work done and it has been improved over the years and you can see a lot more, but it is what it is, right? We're never going to learn definitively from the film or it would have already been done. So you really have to concentrate on what the person says. So I did this last year. I went back and I got in the archives of the Sasquatch archives, actually. Todd Prescott runs that YouTube channel. Todd has a ton of historical Sasquatch stuff, whether it be interviews, videos, those kind of things. I reached out to Todd because it's a video interview of Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. And I think it's 5 days after they filmed the Patty film. It's their first interview ever on a radio station in Canada. So I pulled that interview. Todd gave me permission to use it on the show. So I pulled about 3 minutes of that interview out and I concentrated on the story that Bob said. I listened to the entire thing. It's about 25 minutes of the interview that he has. It's not the full interview, but that's all that's survived. So I listened to that 25 minutes of what Bob and Roger said that day, like 5 days after this, right? And then I went back to one of the most recent. Bob doesn't do a ton of interviews. He's 91 years old at this point. He doesn't do a ton of public speaking anymore or podcasts. So I went back to 2019 and looked at a video interview. I watched his body language. I listened to what he said versus, and I compared the story 5 days after this was filmed and then in 2019, some 50 years later. And with a few exceptions, very little changed. So I had to say, either this guy has practiced this and told it so many times over the last 50 plus years that he has just gotten it down pat and it hasn't changed, or he's just recalling and telling the truth. So I just came down on the fact of, given the totality of the circumstances, I'm not convinced 100% that it's real, but I'm about 80% leaning towards the Patterson Gimlin film being a real Sasquatch in the film. The other one that sticks out to me is the Freeman footage from 1992, Paul Freeman out in the Blues Mountains. It's that famous, he's walking along and he's talking, and this thing steps across it and he goes, "Oh, there he goes." And you see this big figure, right? Well, Doug Hychek's a good friend of mine, from creator and executive producer of Monster Quest for many years. Most people are into Bigfoot or UFOs, have probably seen Monster Quest. But Doug did a breakdown, and he and his sons really worked hard over the last, I mean, it took him 20 years really, but just in the last couple of years, Michael Freeman, Paul Freeman's son, wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Freeman Bigfoot Files about his dad's evidence about the film. And they spent time to enhance. They slowed down. Doug actually bought some, I don't know what he bought for the military to enhance this, but he spent a lot of money to enhance this film. And if you haven't seen the enhanced version of it, you can get it if you buy Michael's book, the Freeman Bigfoot Files. I've seen it. Michael sent it to me when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and I was blown away, because you can see this thing walk across this trail, and in the enhanced version that slowed down and looped and zoomed in, you see this big massive creature walk over to a tree, and it looks like it picks up a toddler or a baby off of the tree, and just like any other mom or dad would do, puts it on its waist, and you see this little thing's feet. It's amazing footage. It really blew me away. I did a conference, a speaking gig last summer out in Idaho. It was me, Michael Freeman, Dr. Jeff Meldrum was there, Cliff Barrickman from Finding Bigfoot. We were on the panel, and we showed the film and we talked about it. And I'll tell you, just the film itself, it's like the Patterson Gimlin film. You're not going to get a definitive answer from the film, but for me, it's the totality of the circumstances. Michael was about 12 or 13, I think, when his dad filmed that, maybe a little younger. And his dad came home so excited, and he showed him this film. He said, "Brian, we watched this tape so many times, I thought my dad was going to break it because he was so excited." And Michael had a friend over. He said he made us watch this Bigfoot like 25 times, and he's putting this tape in the VCR, and he's thinking, he's gonna break this tape. Nobody else is ever gonna see it because he's gonna wear it out. And people have accused him of hoaxing that. People have accused him of hoaxing the footprints, the cast from that day. And I tell you, I was on the fence about it until I had that conversation with Michael, and it dawned on me: people will hoax just about anybody, right? People will lie to people. People will hoax people. But Michael was very close to his dad. He was very close to both of his sons. He loved his family. He's not going to hoax his 12 or 13-year-old son.
That's true. Yeah.
And for him to come home as excited as he was and to share that with his son that way, it convinced me beyond a reasonable doubt at that point that it was a legitimate video of a Sasquatch. So those two things really stuck out. There's a ton of other stuff out there as far as footage that's compelling. There's the Russian video from years ago where this thing like stretches its arms and legs out. It's a really quick thing that goes through. That's pretty compelling to me. I wish it could be cleaned up and enhanced a little bit, but it's very difficult to, and honestly, with AI at this point, just about everything that comes out in the last year or so has just really soured it for me, because it's so difficult to tell the difference in some of these photographs and some of these videos that people are putting out. And then AI is getting smarter. You used to be able to look at the hands and the feet, and they would always be really weird in some of the AI stuff, but the AI's gotten smart. The people who are doing the AI have started working on fixing that. So it makes it even more difficult because they fixed the hand problem. The hands look good now. Fingers look good. The toes look good. The eyes look good. So there's really not anything else as far as I'm concerned. I've seen a few compelling photographs that people have shown me privately that's not out in the zeitgeist for everybody. That happens a lot. I go to speaking events and do conferences and things, and people come up and want to share their story. They'll pull out their cell phone and show you a compelling photograph of what their neighbor or what they captured on a trail camera. And you're like, oh my God, that looks so convincing. It's probably a Bigfoot, but you never see those things in public because those people are smart enough to say, I'm not going to show this to anybody because they don't want the ridicule, right? They don't want to be called kooky or crazy or be accused of hoaxing. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. There's a lot of people out there who put things out that I don't believe are real that sour it for the rest of us. If it doesn't look as good as Todd Standing stuff, and I think Todd's videos are fake, I've told him that. There's no qualms about that. Todd and I have a history of going back and forth about that. But if it doesn't look like that, then people think it's fake. So why put it out and go through the ridicule? Because they just rather show it to somebody like me who's probably going to say, yeah, man, that's a really cool picture. I believe that what you've captured might be a Bigfoot, and then move on. And then they're satisfied. They don't have to put it out there for everybody else to see.
I was going to ask you, are there people who just come and just tell you their story once and that they just leave it at that? These are like people who just don't want the fame. They don't want to be, they just want to get their story out there and be done with it.
So